I built my company from nothing, not from family money, not from connections, not from anyone who believed in me early on. From nothing. A laptop, a sublease on a desk in a shared office space in downtown Columbus, and about $400 I'd saved working doubles at a hotel front desk while finishing my MBA at night. My family had a different word for what I was doing. Foolish. Reckless. Embarrassing. My brother used to say I was trying to be something I wasn't. My mother would nod along, stirring her coffee like she hadn't heard. But she had heard. She always heard. My father was the one who said it plainest at Thanksgiving of all places, while my cousins were passing the rolls around and pretending not to listen. You're going to work yourself into debt chasing something that doesn't want you. I was 26. I had just landed my second client, a small distribution company that needed help restructuring their supplier contracts. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of thing you put on a holiday card, but it was mine. I said nothing that Thanksgiving. I passed the rolls. I helped clear the table. I drove home alone and sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building for a long time, just breathing. That was 8 years ago. The company I run now is called Harlow Consulting Group. We specialize in supply chain strategy and vendor negotiations for mid-size manufacturers across the Midwest. Last year, we closed contracts with 11 new clients and expanded our team to 22 people. We moved into a suite on the 14th floor of a building on High Street that I found through a commercial real estate contact named Edmund, who also happened to mention, almost as an afterthought one afternoon over coffee, that the building itself was being offered as a partial investment opportunity. I looked into it. I made calls. I ran the numbers 3 times over 2 weekends. Then I called Edmund back and said yes. I am not the sole owner. There are 2 other stakeholders. But I hold the majority interest, and my name is on the operating agreement. My family didn't know any of this. Why would they? We weren't close anymore. Not since I stopped showing up to things. Not since I finally, at 31, stopped explaining myself and simply started existing in the way I needed to exist. We exchanged texts on birthdays. My mother called on Christmas. My father and I had lunch once a year at a diner near his house and talked about sports and the weather, and nothing that mattered. My brother and I hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. That was fine. That was chosen. The trouble started, as it often does, with money someone else didn't have. My brother had been out of work for 14 months. I knew this the way you know things about family you're no longer close to, through a cousin's offhand comment. A text from my mother that said more in what it didn't say than what it did. He'd left his job at a logistics company under circumstances no one would explain to me directly, and since then he'd been looking, which I understood to mean he was not looking very hard. I found out later he told people I owed him. That was the word he used, apparently. Owed. Because I had used his name to get my first client. A cousin of his college roommate who had referred me once, briefly, for a meeting that went nowhere. That was the foundation of his claim. One referral, 7 years ago, that produced nothing. And from that, he had constructed an entire grievance. My father helped him construct it. I say that without anger now, though I didn't feel it without anger at the time. My father is a man who has always believed that success is a communal resource when it belongs to someone he's related to. When my uncle made money in real estate in the 90s, my father talked about it as though he had made it too. When I struggled, it was my own problem. When I succeeded, it became available to the family. He called me in February. Not to catch up. To make a request. He said my brother deserved a position at Harlow. Director level, with equity. I told him, as calmly as I could, that I didn't create director-level positions as personal favors and that equity in my company was not something I handed out at a family dinner. He said, "You'd be nothing without this family's name." I asked him what he meant by that, specifically. He hung up. 2 weeks later, I got a letter, not an email. A letter, printed and mailed, from an address I didn't recognize, which turned out to be my father's friend's office. The letter stated that my brother was entitled to a 30% stake in Harlow Consulting Group based on his foundational contribution to the enterprise. It was signed by my father, my brother, and my mother, whose name I stared at for a long time. There was no legal basis for any of it. I knew that. My attorney confirmed it within an hour of me scanning and sending it to her. But it told me something important. They were not approaching this as a family matter anymore. They were approaching it as a campaign. I called my attorney. Her name is Sandra, and she has been doing business law in Columbus for 22 years and has the energy of someone who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. And she told me to document everything, respond to nothing directly, and let her handle the correspondence. I did exactly that. What I didn't expect was what came next. In March, I had a quarterly review meeting scheduled with two of my largest clients, a manufacturing firm out of Dayton and a packaging company based in Indianapolis. These were not small relationships. Combined, they represented nearly 40% of our annual revenue. The meeting was held in our conference room on the 14th floor, which overlooks High Street and gets good light in the afternoon. I had my operations lead, a man named Patrick, running the agenda. I had coffee set up, printed materials, a presentation loaded and ready. I was in my office reviewing notes when my assistant knocked and opened the door about 6 inches and said, very carefully, "There are some people at the reception desk who say they're your family." I looked up. "My family," I repeated. "Yes. A man and a woman and another man. The older gentleman says he's your father." I sat with that for about 4 seconds. Then I said, "Please ask them to wait. Do not bring them back." I texted Sandra. She replied immediately, "Do not engage alone. I can be there in 20 minutes. I texted back, "Come now." Then I walked out to the conference room, smiled at my clients, apologized for the brief delay, and asked Patrick to continue the introduction while I stepped out for just a moment. My father was standing in the reception area in a sport coat I'd seen before at my cousin's graduation 2 summers ago. My brother stood beside him with his hands in his pockets looking at his phone. My mother was seated on the bench near the window, her purse in her lap, not meeting my eyes. I said, "This isn't a good time." My father said, "We're not leaving." My brother looked up from his phone. He said, "We just want to talk." I said, "You mailed me a letter making a legal claim on my company. That's not a conversation. That's a filing. My attorney handles filings." My father's face did something then, shifted in a way I recognized from childhood, from the moments right before things got loud. He said, "You think this office protects you?" It wasn't a question. I said, "I think you should leave." He said, "I know the property management company that handles this building. I have a relationship with the leasing director. You sign a lease here, which means you can lose a lease here. You sign over 20% to your brother, not 30, we're being reasonable. Or I start making calls." My mother was still looking at her purse. My brother had put his phone away. I counted to 3 in my head. Then I said, "Go ahead, make the call." My father blinked. He'd expected me to flinch. I'd spent enough of my childhood flinching that it was probably a reasonable expectation. But I was 34 years old, and I had not built what I built by flinching at the moment it cost something. I said, "Call the leasing director. Right now. I'll wait." He took out his phone. He actually took it out. I think he believed, all the way up to that moment, that I would stop him. That I would calculate the risk and fold. That the company, my company, the thing I had spent 8 years building from $400 and a shared desk, would feel too precious to protect with anything other than capitulation. He called. I heard it ring twice on speaker. I didn't stop him. The voice that answered was Edmund's. Edmund, who had found me the suite. Edmund, who had told me over coffee about the investment opportunity. Edmund, who had processed my paperwork and sent me the operating agreement and knew, better than almost anyone, exactly who I was in relation to this building. My father said, "Edmund, yes, I'm calling about a tenant. A business on the 14th floor, Harlow Consulting Group. I want to discuss the lease." Edmund said, "Of course. And you are?" My father gave his name. Edmund said. I see. And what is your relationship to the tenant? My father said. I'm her father. There was a pause. Edmund said, Sir, I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. You're asking me to discuss the lease arrangements for a business whose primary stakeholder is also part of the ownership group of this building. Is that right? Silence. My father said, What did you say? Edmund said pleasantly, in the voice of a man who has delivered surprising information to surprised people many times, and has learned to do it gently. Ms. Harlow holds a majority interest in the ownership entity that operates this property. She doesn't lease from a management company. She's part of the group that runs it. There's nothing I can do about her tenancy because she's not a tenant in the traditional sense. I hope that clarifies things. My father was still holding the phone. My brother had gone very still. My mother finally looked up. The call had lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. I know, because Patrick timed it later when I told him the story, and he thought that detail was important. I said, Is there anything else? Sandra arrived 11 minutes after that. She walked in with her laptop bag over one shoulder and took one look at my father's face and said to me, Do you want them removed or do you want to handle this yourself? I said, I'd like to finish my client meeting. Can you stay with them? She said yes. I went back to the conference room. I apologized again to my clients for the interruption. The woman from the Dayton firm, whose name is Christine and who has been in manufacturing for 30 years, said, Everything okay? I said, It is now. We finished the meeting. Both clients renewed. The packaging company added a scope expansion we'd been discussing for 2 quarters. Patrick caught my eye when the client stood to leave and gave me the smallest nod I've ever seen a human being give, and I understood it completely. When I came back out, my brother and my mother were gone. My father was still there, seated in the same chair my mother had occupied, his sport coat slightly rumpled, looking at the floor. Sandra was on her phone nearby, giving him the dignified distance of a professional who has been paid to be present. I sat across from him. He didn't look at me immediately. When he did, his face was arranged in a way I didn't have a word for. Not shame, exactly. Not anger. Something collapsed. He said, You own the building. I said, Part of it. He said, Since when? I said, Long enough. He said, Why didn't you? And then stopped. I didn't fill in the rest. He was going to ask why I hadn't told them. And the answer was so obvious and so layered that no version of it I could have given him would have landed right. Because you would have asked me for a piece of it. Because you have never once asked how things were going without wanting something from the answer. Because the day you told me I was chasing something that didn't want me, I made a decision about what to protect and from whom. I said, The letter you sent, the one with Mom's signature. My attorney is treating it as an extortion attempt. Depending on what you did today and what she recommends, that may go further. He looked at his hands. I said, I'm not going to punish you, but I'm also not going to pretend this didn't happen. I think you should leave now. He left. My mother called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't read the letter carefully before she signed it. She said she thought it was just a family agreement, not something legal, and she would never have wanted to hurt me. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it because Sandra had told me to save everything. I didn't call back that night. I made tea and sat at my kitchen counter and looked out the window at the city for a long time, and I thought about the Thanksgiving I was 26, sitting in my car in the parking garage, just breathing. I had come so far from that parking garage, just breathing. I had come so far from that parking garage. Sandra reached out to my father's contact, the friend whose address had been on the letter, and made clear what the legal exposure was for all parties involved. The friend, to his credit, folded quickly. He had not understood, he said, the full nature of what he'd been asked to put his address on. He issued a written withdrawal on behalf of all signatories. My brother called me 3 weeks later, not to apologize, to ask if I knew anyone hiring in supply chain operations, because he was looking to get back into the industry. I said I'd think about it. I have not thought about it. My mother and I speak occasionally now. Short calls. She asks about the company and I tell her it's going well and she says she's proud of me in a voice that sounds like she's reading something. I don't correct her. I don't need her to mean it more than she does. I used to need that. I spent a long time needing that. There's a table in the small seating area just off my office where I take calls sometimes, in the afternoons when the light comes in at an angle and the building is quiet. Patrick brought in a plant and put it near the window. The Dayton firm sent flowers after we renewed. There's a framed quote on the wall that a friend gave me years ago. It says, "Make the thing and protect it." And I look at it some mornings when I come in early and the office is empty and I can hear my own footsteps on the floor that I partly own. I built this, not from connections or family money or a single person who believed in me before I believed in myself. I built it from a laptop and $400 and the particular kind of determination that comes from being told, over and over, that you won't. The hard part isn't the work. The work I was always willing to do. The hard part is the moment someone you love uses the thing you built as leverage against you. And you have to choose, quietly and without ceremony, between protecting yourself and protecting the relationship. I chose myself. I would choose it again. If your family has done something like this to you, if you know what it feels like to build something with your own hands, while the people who should have been in your corner were busy deciding how much of it they deserved, leave a comment. I read every single one, and if you haven't been through it, but you're still here, thank you. It means more than you know. I've thought about that phone call a lot since it happened. Not the part where Edmund confirmed what I already knew, but the moment just before, when my father actually dialed. When he genuinely believed that making that call would end something for me. That's the part that stays with me. There's something clarifying about watching someone try to use your own work against you. It strips everything down. You stop wondering whether you're being too sensitive or reading the situation wrong. You stop making excuses for people because they share your last name. When my father stood in my reception area and said, "You think this office protects you?" he wasn't asking. He was telling me what he believed, that everything I had built was conditional. That it could be taken. That I should have been afraid. I wasn't afraid. And I think that surprised him more than anything. Edmund said, "Here's what I've come to understand about the way things unfolded. Actions have weight. Not in a poetic sense. In a practical, real-world sense. Every choice my brother made over those 14 months, every conversation my father had with his friend, every line of that letter they mailed me, those choices built something too. Just not what they intended. They built a situation where the only possible outcome was exposure. You cannot construct a campaign against someone on a false foundation and expect it to hold when pressure is applied. The math doesn't work. The logic collapses, and when it collapsed. It collapsed publicly in front of clients in a building I help own, with my attorney 12 minutes away. I don't take satisfaction in that the way I thought I might. What I feel is closer to exhaustion and clarity at the same time. The exhaustion comes from recognizing how long I spent managing their perception of me, softening my accomplishments so they wouldn't feel threatening, showing up to dinners where I knew I'd leave feeling smaller than when I arrived, because I kept hoping something would shift. That hope cost me more than I've ever calculated. The clarity comes from knowing it's over. Not the relationship, that's complicated and ongoing and probably always will be. But the version of me that needed their approval to feel like what I built was real. That version is gone. She sat in a parking garage at 26 years old, just breathing, and she's been gone for a while. I just didn't always act like it. What I would tell anyone in a situation like this, anyone who is building something while the people around them treat that thing as a resource they're entitled to, is that integrity is not just a moral quality. It's a structural one. The way you build matters. The relationships you maintain, the documentation you keep, the professionals you surround yourself with. Sandra, Edmund, Patrick, those aren't just support. They're the architecture that holds when someone tries to knock the walls in. My brother called 3 weeks after everything happened and asked if I knew anyone hiring. He didn't apologize. He just moved on to the next ask, as though the last ask had never occurred. I used to think that kind of audacity was a character flaw specific to him. Now, I think it's just what happens when someone has never been held to account. The consequences caught up eventually, they always do. I built Harlow Consulting Group in the quiet. No fanfare, no family backing, no one at my holiday table saying they believed in me. And when the moment came that tested whether it was real, whether I had actually built something that could withstand pressure from the people who knew me when I was nobody, it held. Build the thing. Protect it. Trust the foundation you laid when no one was watching. That's all I've got.